Welcome to tonight's video on absolute extrema. An absolute maximum or minimum value is the highest point. So notice these are local or relative max and min because they're the highest or lowest points in the area. They're usually peaks and valleys of a parabola. But an absolute maximum or minimum value would be like the highest point no matter what. So this is an absolute maximum. This is an absolute minimum, whereas if you see here's a local minimum and local max, because those are a peak or a valley. There are three different spots where an absolute maximum can occur. The first one is where the derivative is equal to 0, or if the derivative is undefined, or at the endpoints of an interval. So if you look at this graph here, what is the absolute max of the graph? Well, notice the absolute max is right here. Right here at y equals 8. Because remember, the absolute max is the y coordinate. So the absolute minimum is down here at -6. Now, in the interval between -2 and +2, which is right here, the absolute maximum would be this of 3. Now, between -2 and +4, which moves it over here, the absolute maximum is now this endpoint, which is 5. Between -4 and 0, which is right there, the absolute minimum is -2. And between -4 and 2, so between -4 and +2, the absolute minimum is -4. So notice sometimes it was at a peak or a valley, and sometimes it was at an endpoint. So here we have an equation. So remember, the first thing we need to do is find the critical numbers. So we'll find the derivative. So the derivative here is 3x squared minus 6x. And then we're going to set that derivative equal to 0. So we get 3x equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. So these are what are called the critical numbers. So to find the max and minimum value, we're going to put these critical numbers and the endpoints of the interval into the original function. So f of 0 that's equal to 3. F of 2 that's equal to 8 minus 12 plus 3, so it's -1. F of -1/2, so it's -1/2 to the third, minus 3 times -1/2 squared plus 3. So it is -1/8 minus 3 times 1/4 plus 3. So it's -1/8 minus 3/4 plus 3. And then when you put it all into eighths, it's -1/8 minus 6/8 plus 24 over 8. So that's going to equal positive 17 over 8. And then when we find f of 4, so it's 4 to the third minus 3 times 4 squared plus 3. So you get 64 minus 48 plus 3, which is 19. So you have an absolute maximum of 19 and that's at x equals 4. And then you have the absolute minimum of -1 at x equals 2. So those are the absolute max and min. The graph is below, I showed you, so notice here's 419, that's the endpoint of the interval. And here's 2, -1, and notice we're only looking really between 4 and -1/2, which is here. So that's why, if you notice, this is the minimum and that's the maximum. All right, next question. Same thing. It says on the interval now from -1 to 3. So let's find the derivative. So it's 2 minus 2/3 times 3 is 2, x to the -1/3. And then when we set this equal to 0, and then we move to the bottom to make it a positive exponent, that means one of the critical numbers is x equals 0, because that would make the function undefined. Now, to find the other one, we're going to add 2 over x to the 1/3 to both sides. So that equals 2. And then when we solve, we'll multiply by x to the 1/3. So that cancels. So you get 2 equals 2x to the 1/3. Divide by 2. So 1 equals x to the 1/3. So that means 1 equals x. Because if you raise it to the 3rd power, that gives you x equals 1. So those are the two critical numbers. So now we substitute in the interval, 0. So 2 times 0 minus 3 times 0 to the 2/3. So that's equal to 0. When we put in 1, we get 2 times 1 minus 3 times 1 to the 2/3. That's equal to 2 minus 3, which is -1. When we put in -1, we get 2 times -1 minus 3 times -1 to the 2/3. Now remember, -1 to the 2/3, that's the same as saying the cube root of -1 squared. So basically it's the cube root of 1, which is 1. So it's -2 minus 3, which is -5. And then f of 3, so that's 2 times 3 minus 3 times 3 to the 2/3. So this is 6 minus, and then 3 to the 2/3 is the same as saying the cube root of 3 squared, which is the cube root of 9. So 3 times 3, the cube root of 9. And when you put that in your calculator, you get -0.24. So that means the absolute maximum is 0 at x equals 0, and the absolute minimum is -5 at x equals -1. And you can check, right? You can check the graph. Notice, remember, the interval is between -1 and 3, right? That's the interval you're looking at. So notice this is the highest point and this is the lowest point. So that makes sense. Now, on a test or quiz, you won't have the graph, but you could always graph it on your calculator if you wanted to check. All right, that concludes our video for this evening. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Have a good evening.